Good evening. Tonight's story is The Legend of King O'Toole and Saint Kevin by Samuel Lover, as published in the Irish Fairy Book in 1909. This story is a local legend of Glendalough, and Lover wrote it down as it was told to him. It's a charming and funny little story that manages to somehow also encapsulate an enormous amount of information about the history and geography of the region. And once again, you get to enjoy my take on an Irish accent. As you might expect, this story uses some idiosyncratic words and terms. I will put definitions on the screen, but in my opinion, in most cases, a literal definition isn't truly necessary to understand and enjoy the story. So now, let's open our imaginations and begin. There was once a king called King O'Toole, who was a fine old king in the old ancient times, long ago, and it was him that owned the churches in the early days. Surely, said I, the churches were not in King O'Toole's time. Oh, by no means, your honour. Troth, it's yourself that's right enough there. But you know the place is called the churches, because they were built after by Saint Kevin, and went by the name of the churches evermore, and therefore, of course, the place being so called, I say that the king owned the churches. And why not, sir, seeing 'twas his birthright, time out of mind, beyond the flood? Well, the king, you see, was the right sort. He was the rail boy, and he loved sport as he loved his life, hunting in particular, and from the rising of the sun up he got, and away he went over the mountains, beyond after the deer, and the fine times them were, for the deer was as plenty then, aye, troth, far plentier than the sheep is now, and that's the way it was with the king from the crow of the cock to the song of the redbreast. Well, it was all mighty good as long as the king had his health, but you see, in course of time, the king grown old, and by reason he was stiff in his limbs, and when he got stricken in years, his heart failed him, and he was entirely for want of diversion, because he couldn't go a-hunting no longer. And by dad, the poor king was obliged at last for to get a goose to divert him. You see, the goose used for to swim across the lake and go down diving for trout, and not finer trout in all Ireland than those same trout, and catch fish on a Friday for the king, and flew every other day round about the lake diverting the poor king, so you'd think he'd break his sides a-laughing at the frolicsome tricks of his goose. So, in the course of time, the goose was the greatest pet in the country, and the biggest rogue, and diverted the king for to no end, and the poor king was as happy as the day was long. So that's the way it was, and all went on mighty well until, by dad, the goose got stricken in years, as well as the king, and grew stiff in the limbs like her master, and couldn't divert him no longer. And then it was that the poor king was lost complete, and didn't know what in the world to do, seeing he was gone out of all diversion, by reason that the goose was no more in the flower of her bloom. Well, the king was nigh broken-hearted and melancholy entirely, and was walking one morning by the edge of the lake, lamenting his cruel fate, and thinking of drowning himself that he could get no diversion in life, when all of a sudden, turning round the corner beyond, who should he meet but a mighty decent young man coming up to him. God save you, says the king, for the king was a civil-spoken gentleman by all accounts. God save you, says he to the young man. God save you kindly, says the young man to him back again. God save you, King O'Toole. True for you, says the king. I am King O'Toole, says he, prince and plenipotentiary of these parts, says he. But how come you to know that, says he. Oh, never mind, says Saint Kevin, for it was he that was in it. And now, may I make bold as to ax, how is your goose, King O'Toole, says he. Blur and eggers, how come you know about me goose, says the king. I no matter, I was given to understand it, says Saint Kevin. Oh, that's a folly to talk, says the king, because myself and my goose is private friends, says he, and no one could tell you, says he, barring the fairies. Oh, then it wasn't the fairies, says Saint Kevin, for I'd have you know, says he, that I don't keep the likes of such company. You might do worse then, my gay fella, says the king, for they could show you a crock of money as easy as kiss hand, and that's not to be sneezed at, says the king, by a poor man, says he. Maybe I've a better way of making money myself, says the saint. By gor, says the king, barrin you're a coiner, says he, that's impossible. I'd scorn to be the like, my lord, says Kevin, mighty high. I'd scorn to be the like, says he. Then what are ye, says the king, that makes money so easy by your own account? I'm an honest man, says Saint Kevin. Well, honest man, says the king, and how is it you make your money so easy? By making old things as good as new, says Saint Kevin. Is it a tinker ye are, says the king. No, says the saint. I'm no tinker by trade, King O'Toole. I've a better trade than a tinker, says he. What would ye say, says he, if I made your old goose as good as new? My dear, at the word of making his goose as good as new, you'd think the poor old king's eyes was ready to jump out of his head. "And," says he, "troth then, I'd give you more money nor you could count," says he, "if ye did the like, and I'd be beholden to you in the bargain." "I scorn your dirty money," says Saint Kevin. "Faith, then, I'm thinking a trifle of change would do you no harm," says the king, looking up sly at the old cowbean that Saint Kevin had on him. "I have a vow agin it," says the saint, "and I am book sworn," says he, "never to have gold, silver, nor brass in my company." "Barrin' the trifle you can't help," says the king, mighty cute, and looking him straight in the face. "You just hot it," says Saint Kevin. "But though I can't take money," says he, "I could take a few acres of land if you'd give them to me." "With all the veins of my heart," says the king, "if you can do what you say." "Try me," says Saint Kevin. "Call down your goose here," says he, "and I'll see what I can do for her." With that the king whistled, and down came the poor goose, all as one as a hound, waddling up to the poor old cripple, her master, and as like him as two peas. The minute the saint clapped his eyes on the goose, "I'll do the job for you," says he, "King O'Toole." "By Gemini," says King O'Toole, "if you do, but I'll say you're the cleverest fella in the 7 parishes." "Oh, by dad," says Saint Kevin, "you must do more nor that. My horn's not so soft all out," says he, "as to repair your old goose for nothing. What'll you give me if I do the job for you? That's the chat," says Saint Kevin. "I'll give you whatever you ask," says the king. "Isn't that fair?" "Divil a fairer," says the saint. "That's the way to do business. Now," says he, "this is the bargain I'll make with you, King O'Toole. Will you give me all the ground as the goose flies over, the first offer after I make her as good as new?" "I will," says the king. "You won't go back on your word," says Saint Kevin. "Honour bright," says King O'Toole, holding out his fist. "Honour bright," says Saint Kevin back again. "It's a bargain," says he. "Come here," says he to the poor old goose. "Come here, you unfortunate old cripple," says he, "and it's I that'll make you the sporting bird." With that, my dear, he took up the goose by the 2 wings. "Chris and my crass on you," says he, marking her to grace with the blessed sign of the same minute, and throwing her up in the air, "Pooh," says he, just giving her a blast to help her. And with that, my jewel, she took to her heels, flying like one of the eagles themselves, cutting as many capers as a swallow before a shower of rain. Away she went down there, right for an instant, along the side of the cliff, and flew over St. Kevin's bed. That is, where St. Kevin's bed is now, but 'twas not then, by reason it wasn't made, but was contrived after by St. Kevin himself, that the women might leave him alone. And on with her under lugged off, and round the end of the lake there, far beyond where you see the waterfall, and on with her then right over the lead mines of Laganour. That is, where the lead mines is now, but 'twas not then, by reason they weren't discovered, but was all gold in St. Kevin's time. Well, over the end of Laganour she flew, stout and steady, and round the other end of the little lake by the churches, that is, of course, where the churches is now, but 'twas not then, by reason they were nor built but afterwards by St. Kevin, and o'er the big hill there over your head, where you see the big clift, and that clift in the mountain was made by Finn McCool, where he cut across it with a big sword that he got made a purpose by the blacksmith out of Rathdrum, cousin of his own, for to fight a giant that dared him and the Carrack of Kildare. And he tried the sword first on the mountain and cut it down into a gap that is plain to this day, and faith, sure enough, it's the same sauce he served the giant soon and sudden, and chopped him in two like a pratie for the glory of his soul in old Ireland. Well, down she flew over the cliff and fluttering over the wood there at Polnass. Well, as I said, after fluttering over the wood a little bit, but to please herself, the goose flew down and bit at the foot of the king as fresh as a daisy after flying round his dominions, just as if she hadn't flew 3 perch. Well, my dear, it was a beautiful sight to see the king standing with his mouth open, looking at his poor old goose flying as light as a lark and better nor ever she was. And when she lit at his foot, he patted her on the head. "Ma vornin," says he, "but you are the darling to the world." "And what do you say to me," says St. Kevin, "for making her the like?" "By gore," says the king, "I say nothing beats the art of men, barring the bees." "And do you say no more nor that?" says St. Kevin. "And that I'm beholden to you," says the king. "But will you give me all the ground the goose flew over?" says St. Kevin. "I will," says King O'Toole, "and you're welcome to it," says he, "though it's the last acre I have to give." "But you'll keep your word true," says the saint. "As true as the sun," says the king. "It's well for you," says St. Kevin, mighty sharp. "It's well for you, King O'Toole, that you said that word," said he. "For if you didn't say that word, the devil receive the bit of your goose it ever fly again," said St. Kevin. "Oh, you needn't laugh," said old Joe, "for it's truth I'm telling you." Well, when the king was as good as his word, St. Kevin was pleased with him, and then it was he that made himself known to the king. Well, my dear, that's the way the place came, all at once, into the hands of St. Kevin, for the goose flew round every individual acre of King O'Toole's property, you see, being let into the sacred by St. Kevin, who was mighty cute, and so, when he done the old king out of his property for the glory of God, he was pleased with him, and he and the king was the best of friends evermore and after, for the poor old king was doting, you see. And the king had his goose as good as new to divert him as long as he lived, and the saint supported him after he came into his property, as I told you, until the day of his death. And that was soon after, for the poor goose thought he was catching a trout one Friday, but, my jewel, it was a mistake he made, and instead of a trout, it was a thieving horse eel. And, by gore, instead of the geese killing a trout for the king's supper, by dad, the eel killed the king's goose, and small blame to him, but he didn't ate her, because he daren't ate what St. Kevin laid his blessed hands on. The best sentence in this story is, "And that cleft in the mountain was made by Finn McCool, where he cut it across with a big sword that he got made on purpose by a blacksmith out of Rathdrum, a cousin of his own, for to fight a giant that dared him and the Carragh of Kildare, and he tried the sword first on the mountain and cut it down into a gap, as plain as to this day, and faith, sure enough, it's the same sauce he served the giant soon and sudden, and chopped him in two like a potato for the glory of his soul and of old Ireland," because it's not even the entire sentence, it's just a parenthetical comment that contains an entire legend by itself. I love this story so much. I love how much the king loves his goose and how he happily gives up everything he owns for her sake. And of course I love how the story is told with all these side comments and these digressions that describe the entire county and its history and its legends and its economy. I'm fascinated by all these side stories. I want to know about St. Kevin building a special bed so the women would leave him alone. This story really gives you a wonderful sense of being in a very specific place, grounded in that landscape, looking around you at the scenes where these events occurred, the actual waterfall, the lake, the cleft in the mountain. There are no contemporaneous records of the life of St. Kevin, founder and patron saint of Glendalough. His history wasn't formally documented until 1645 in the Acts of the Irish Saints. According to that book, Kevin was born in 498 AD. After being ordained, he moved to the valley of Glendalough to live life as a solitary hermit, communing with nature. St. Kevin's bed is a man-made cave overlooking the upper lake of Glendalough. The cave is so small that it can only be used as a bed. There isn't room to stand in it, and the climb is extremely difficult and dangerous. St. Kevin's bed is itself a place of legend. Centuries of famous Irish heroes and rebels are said to have taken refuge there at various times. Eventually, the historic St. Kevin attracted disciples and he founded a thriving monastery in the place, and he lived a peaceful and pious life before dying in 618 AD. Incidentally, this does put his death about 4 centuries before the O'Toole clan ruled in County Wicklow. This is the second story on the channel from Samuel Lover, Irish painter, poet, novelist, and composer and songwriter. Although this version of this story was published in the Irish Fairy Book in 1909, it is probably a reprint from Lover's Legends and Stories of Ireland, originally published in 1834. And let's also note again these gorgeous illustrations by George Denham that make this book so special. I also want to briefly mention that although it is impossible to escape mentions of legendary Irish hero Finn McCool, I won't be doing him on this channel. The legend of Finn McCool is one of the great epic hero cycles of world literature, and it's absolutely incredible. However, huge hero cycles like that are a bit outside of my scope, and that kind of material has been covered so well in so many other places. I'm more interested in finding kind of obscure and overlooked stories. If you listen all the way to the end of the video, you get to hear me make a confession. This week's confession is that I was attacked by a goose when I was a child. I was about 2 years old and my mom and I had gone to Laurelhurst Park to feed the ducks. We had a whole loaf of that cheap sliced bread in a plastic sleeve, and we were feeding the ducks at the pond. And Mom took a few slices of bread and she left me with a loaf, and she turned around to feed some of the ducks. I was trying to feed the ducks, but of course the ducks mostly stay in the water while the geese kind of come up and they were crowding around me. And one goose kind of went for the slice of bread in my left hand, but I pulled it away because I wanted to feed a duck. Then the goose got mad and it stood up and stretched up its neck and it started beating its wings at me, and it was snatching at the whole loaf of bread in my right hand. And of course, standing up like that, it was way bigger than I was, and it was absolutely terrifying. I shrieked, and my mom turned around, and she picked me up, and she set me on a park bench, so at least I was kind of out of its reach, and she chased it away. But it did get the entire loaf of bread that it was trying to steal from me anyway. And ever since then, I have known that geese are not to be trifled with. If you like to trifle around with weird old stories and obscure literature, you should subscribe to this channel. Every week at Restored Lore, I find interesting myths and legends and I share them with new audiences, and you really don't want to miss anything. Also, when you like, subscribe, share, or comment below, you really help out the channel. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next week.